for agreeing to talk here, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your research.
Thank you. Thank you, Anka. Let me just get this share screen going. Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reevaluating Authenticity, Creativity in the Contemporary Craft Making in China, or rather the making of craft in the age of creative economy, on the topic of authenticity. I would like to start by thanking Anka and Chris and the wonderful Understanding Authenticity project for not only giving us this opportunity for this talk, but also, more importantly, to add the critical concept of authenticity to the lexicon of our project, Craft China. It has been a very fruitful process of going through again and rethinking what we've been doing with Craft China since 2018. And so today is just some thoughts in relation to authenticity and
Lisheng,
sorry
to interrupt. I think what we're seeing actually is the presenter view.
Oh dear.
I'm not sure if there's a way to do it so we can sort of see the slide in full while you have your notes.
Well, that might be difficult. Well.
I think maybe one way we could do is just leave it like this, and then slide the bar down. And you can actually play with the dimensions of the PowerPoint screen itself too, I think.
Right. So are you, well, that way. So you are seeing the PowerPoint at the moment.
Yeah, so we can see.
We do it like this, and then I'll use, because I do need my script, so I'll use Word at the same time. Is that okay?
Yeah, you could do that too. Or even if you slide it up a bit too and keep your notes. So just know that we'll see your notes as well if you do that. Wow. Yeah. Great.
Sure. Right, where were we? Okay, so authenticity. As I said, it's been a very sort of productive way of going through what we've been doing, and I think personally, I would like to begin with the sort of similarities or sort of the things that that are shared between China and the West in regard to authenticity. As authenticity, as personally, I don't believe that Chinese people are more kind of sophisticated about it. It's been a sort of central concept, central element to the understanding of heritage value, and the ability to tell the genuine from the fake is a key element in the Chinese Acatarian tradition. So, and also it's been playing a great part in the revival of the heritage market and also the heritage industry after the Cultural Revolution and the emergence of the first era of private collecting and also private museum building in the 1980s and the 1990s. So in many ways, the pursuit of authenticity means not only getting better value of your money, but also possessing the right type of knowledge about the past. So I wouldn't call it, an obsession, but authenticity is a key element that constitutes sort of Chinese people's interest in heritage, be it built heritage, museum collection, or crafts, or ICH, intangible cultural heritage. People want the real thing. Hence, the remorse over the cultural loss during the wars and the early decades of the People's Republic, and today's ambivalences surrounding the projects of repair and rebuilding. So authenticity is greatly significant. What is new about what is new about the creative economy, or the significant change that this movement brings, is that the value of the new things created on top of the authentic. And it's been a process of making heritage more accessible and affordable in that sense, not only by the rich and the experts, the collectors, but also accessible to the ordinary people. So this is sort of what we want to bring in from our project to the discussion of authenticity. The rise of China's creative economy is certainly a state-orchestrated movement. A key year or a date here is 2005, when the state allowed legally the investment of private capital into cultural industries. And one can, well understand it from the top-down economic policy shifts, from the idea of made in China to created in China. But I'm trying to sort of think it through from the perspective of, the people and the impact of the emergence of the creative industry on people's appreciation and consumption of culture and heritage, both as makers of heritage and consumers of heritage. So what the creative economy, as I said just now, brings is a break of the established sort of knowledge structure about heritage. Now what is created, the new stuff that is created, is now valued, and which wasn't the case as the previous structure was centered around authenticity. So creative economy has brought a kind of a dynamic expansion or redefinition of heritage value. So from this approach, we see why the general development of creating the new has led to a concomitant rise in the interest and consumption of the old. So this was what interested us initially when we started the Craft China project. So very briefly, Craft China is a research project that we conduct from the Institute of Archaeology at UCL in partnership with the Chinese National Museum of Ethnology based in Beijing. That has been doing over the years a great deal of work on exploring the conditions of traditional crafts and ethnic heritage in China, especially under the current rise of the creative economy. Officially, the creative economy movement has undergone two phases. The first one being the kind of nationwide development of designated creative zones or cultural creative zones or parks in the cities, where you will find design studios, art galleries, music, or other type of performative art companies are clustered. What you're looking at is a rendering of the planning of the famous 798, which I actually live quite close by, in Beijing, one of the sort of the earliest, most well-known creative parks. And to the extent that every large or medium-sized city would have at least one or a few of these parks, and metropolises like Shanghai can have up to 200 something creative parks. This happened, so this is contemporary art galleries, and this happened with a parallel process of the establishment of the intangible cultural heritage inherited system, along with its artisan studios. The ICH displays have been usually part of these creative zones. And also in heritage speak, or in policy speak, this has been articulated as productive protection, or more crudely, sell to save, meaning that heritage, especially craft included, will need to find new ways to reach their audience and consumers in this new age of the creative economy. I think David will be delving sort of deeper into that later. And this is done usually with collaboration with design and arts, since they many of them happen in the same creative zones. And the second phase of the creative economy is what is called the mass entrepreneurship and mass innovation, which was initiated in 2015, which aims to provide platforms for more people to become entrepreneurs in these cultural or creative industries. What is happening here is that these platforms are moving more and more often online. And so the further development of the creative economy is relying increasingly on the online e-commerce platforms, which is, as I believe many of us are familiar with, it's manifesting a great gigantic selling power today. And what you're looking at is a 2018 what is called a making festival created by Alibaba, the company, or Taobao, the website. And it's been going on for several years now. And it's a festival that celebrates cultural innovative projects, and you can have they're selling their creative products both online, but they will have a kind of a showcase in different cities every year during a period like something like a design week. So this is, I believe, a new direction of where the trade and the consumption of heritage in the sort of latest phase of the creative economy is going. And so in today's talk, we are going to share two small case studies that we did within the Craft China project, and hoping to sort of use them as examples of these shifts. So I'm handing over to you, David, for the first case study. Should I stop sharing? Okay, stop sharing. Stop sharing.
Hold on a sec, David. I don't know if you are muted. Oh, yeah, hold on one sec. Ask to unmute. How about now? Can you?
I am unmuted. Thank you very much, Chris. I can speak. Thank you very much, Anka. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's come all the way to the end. Here we go. Right. Can you all see? Give me a thumbs up if you can see something about productive protection. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I want to, just before we get into our first case study about the Rong Design group, I want to just dive a little bit deeper into the idea of productive protection and the kind of logic that it has in relationship to authenticity. So I think when you hear it spoken about, it's often talked about as a shift in how intangible cultural heritage is preserved from a prior model where it's the idea was freezing it in time to allowing it to adapt and evolve. And this has kind of, been going on in China since 2009. But really kind of two big kind of moments were the establishment of two batches of national intangible cultural heritage protection demonstration bases in October 2011 and May 2014. And there you can see one from 2011, the Beijing enamel factory. And what typically happens in these spaces, as Lee talked about, is there's a collaboration between traditional craft makers and designers to make some sort of new products. And this idea that productive protection, and product is the key word here, emphasizes the concept of the commodification of intangible cultural heritage. So that in order that you can find a space for it in the market, and then the market will just allow it to sustain. And this is a big kind of governmental kind of policy. So it's there, it's one of the focus on in the Chinese traditional crafts revitalization plan of 2015. And I think this idea about revitalization, what does vitality mean in this context, is a really interesting one in terms of our questions about authenticity and what is authentic in this context. It's been critiqued, this method, because people think traditional values and meaning of intangible cultural heritage practices will disappear through economic, social, and political pressures. So, and one of the key things is about the idea of the original. So the growing craft making industry in contemporary China, craft productions can no longer be viewed as original, that idea of originality and authenticity here. And there's a wider call for the question of whether authenticity is still present after the commodification process. And this needs to be explored. Now, I'm going to now move to a specific case study, the Rong Design Studio, and I'm going to begin with kind of a bit of a kind of a magic trick, a tale of metamorphosis of how do you transform an umbrella into a chair. And that's kind of appropriate because Rong is often sometimes translated as fusion or melting. And this is also one of the kind of the important things that's told by the Rong designers when they talk about that origin narrative, when they come up with this idea of taking a traditional Chinese paper umbrella and transforming it into a paper chair, which they did for the first time kind of back in 2011. And the story of Rong kind of begins in even further than back in 2008 when Zhang Li, who's from China, from the Hangzhou area, Christoph John from Germany, and Jovana Bogdanovic from Serbia met each other at Milan Design School. And Zhang, who was training in Europe, he reflected on the kind of the idea of the universality of design and asked the question, what does it mean to be a contemporary Chinese designer? How can you work within a past tradition, but not be sort of trapped within it and have a sort of contemporary feel? And one of the first projects that they worked on was they returned. Zhang Li brought Christoph John and Jovana Bogdanovic back with him to Hangzhou, and they began various experiments to see how he could be contemporary working within a Chinese tradition. And one of these saw them collaborate with traditional umbrella makers in Hangzhou to try and make a paper umbrella that people would actually use. Now, if you go to Hangzhou in Zhejiang province in China, about an hour's train from Shanghai, you can go to the Umbrella Museum there, and you get quite a sad, melancholy tale of the umbrella in the face of modernity in the final panel of the exhibition. Because of my poor photograph, you can't read that, but I'm going to read it to you, the final line. Gradually, modern metal umbrellas are becoming the mainstream, rapidly replacing traditional ones in the modernization. Red oil paper umbrellas, though still beautiful and lively, are drifting apart from our life and finally exist as intangible cultural heritage. So the story told within this panel is very much kind of, of the redundancy of intangible cultural heritage. There's something divorced from everyone's life. And this was something that Zhang Li tried to go against. He tried to make a paper umbrella that people would actually use. However, he failed. People didn't want to buy a paper umbrella functional. They were happy with their metal and fabric umbrellas. But in the process of working with the craftsmen, what they did find was that they were able to how you could layer paper to make a hard surface. And you can see that in the sort of the close-up design image there of this chair, which has these kind of layers of paper coming out of it. And the photo doesn't quite do it justice. When you sit in it, there's a very kind of nice haptic quality. It's very kind of soft and yet hard at the same time. And you can kind of, it's like there's an organicness to it. I'd really like one of these chairs, but I'll give you the reason why I can't have one later on. And this was Piao 2, the one that they made, which came out in 2011. And out of this came a specific method from this kind of example. This was their kind of eureka moment in their narrative, which they refer to as deconstruct thinking. And this is how it's described in the Sun Mao Rong exhibition in Design Society in Shenzhen, which was held in 2019. And I'm going to quote the panel. It's a research method and specialized design transformation which takes material and craft apart in order to understand its essence. It is breaking through the boundaries and craft. It aims to discover the logic of traditional creation and transfer it to a contemporary design language. So this is the kind of solution that Zhang Li found to that question: how do you be a Chinese designer working in a contemporary fashion? And you can kind of see some kind of examples here in the Sun Mao exhibition, which was really about the kind of how these traditional joints within Chinese woodwork could be taken, deconstructed into their essence on the left, and then used in different materials in this plastic chair example over here on the right, which is part of the Mogu series. So you can take the idea of making these joints, but transform them into a different material, and the idea of the essence that is still kind of to be there and to be found. And what's quite interesting in this exhibition is also about how it's important for them to reference that they're working with traditional craft makers. So they talk about how within thinking about these joints, they consult with Fu Zhongwang, who's a representative of the Sun Mao craft artist and former curator of Hubei Museum of Artists, involved in making these bridge. So they're connecting themselves with this kind of lineage. And that's also how they visually deconstruct it. So this is, they make these particular diagrams for particular crafts and try and link them together, link the different forms of the different types of joints and where they originate from. So you have these kind of evolutionary, almost kind of typological models whereby you can see things connected together. So it's all about that, trying to find a connection that might be there, that's not maybe there still in the material that's being used, or even the final form, as we saw within the example of the chair. And this is a key thing within the design library that they've created there in Qingshan village, just outside, about 45 miles outside Hangzhou. You can go and visit there as a designer, as a craftsman, and then they have all of these different crafts, physical materials in the space, which you can then go and look at. So you have over there on the left on my screen, you have the paper layering, the paper chair that came from the umbrellas that they were able to think and say, we could make a chair out of this. And also individual dyeing processes, actual artifacts where there's particular patterns. And so there's this idea of trying to create this resource that people can draw upon. Now, what's quite interesting, I think, also is that originally when they relocated to Hangzhou, they relocated to Yuhang, which is this kind of industrial area in Hangzhou, and they set up a studio there. But then they relocated to outside of Hangzhou to Qingshan village, which has this idyllic photo takes. This is one I took myself. This isn't like from the marketing page, you know, based up in the mountains, a big reservoir. And this can be seen, one of the things one of the designers, Wang Xingji, says is, all you need to work now is light, water, and internet. So there's an idea of trying to escape and move out from somewhere which can be connected to other kind of rural revival movements in China's various parts in the past, but also I suppose that is one of the big kind of trends or themes that we're seeing at the moment. And certainly, you know, in terms of us now working in this COVID-19 environment, it's certainly a quote that rings true for me. Now, it wasn't just that they were moving out here because, you know, you're in this hillside kind of environment, but also there was a bamboo workshop in Qingshan village. And so this was one of the kind of the first workshops that they worked with. And so there's this idea that if you're, as a designer, you can't necessarily do this on your own. You have to be working with traditional kind of craft makers as part of this kind of process. And so this was the first workshop that they sort of worked with, but gradually they've worked with other ones, not in the village, but beyond. So they travel out, and some of them are quite far. I think so one of them's in Qinghai, but you have this idea that, you know, you can go find people with traditional skills and then create something new with them. And so, for example, they have design residencies there, and you can see here what's happened is the designers come in, they've combined something, the metal work has been inspired by the houses in the village, which I'll show you in a little bit, but the bamboo comes from the workshop, and they've gone to the bamboo workers and said, this is my design, how can we make this, and they've made these particular stools out of this. And they have kind of regular kind of month-long residencies and longer 6-month residencies where people come in to do this. Now, I think it's important to think about what's happening here with the Rong Design Studio in Qingshan village within the wider heritagescape of Hangzhou. So Hangzhou, I think, is really interesting because it's got this longer tradition of heritage preservation. And you can see this in, for example, in the Xiling Seal Society, which was founded in 1904 on Qingshan Hill, very close to the West Lake. And this is established to preserve the onset of seal engraving, but more broadly, literati culture against that kind of period, you know, where in the end of the Qing dynasty, when you have kind of modernity encroaching, lots of modernization movements. And this was really a kind of a pushback, a retreat again, and saying into this particular kind of craft. At the same time, on the outer campus of Hangzhou, you have the Chinese Academy of Art, which contains the Chinese Museum of Design, which features a Bauhaus collection and what is described as the first museum in China with a systematic collection of modern Western design. And what I found when I visited here, you can see everyone standing around a chair, worshipping a chair, the pinnacle of, you know, what Western design might be seen. But within the opening panel, there's this really kind of something maybe echoing what Zhang Li was saying about, you know, what does it mean to be a contemporary designer working in China? The paragraph goes, modern design is rooted in an industrialization in Western society. It has completely altered the living environments, the lifestyles, creative forms, and communication approaches of human beings. Hence, modern design can be understood as the material embodiment of modernity. Motivated by human design, human civilization is inevitably heading towards a modern mode of unification. So a really kind of interesting, you know, argument that's put out there in the panel, one I'm sure which many kind of anthropologists in the audience will kind of bristle at. But also what's kind of interesting is thinking about that in terms of what's happening in Qingshan village, which the Rong Design Studio is based. When we kind of spent some time there, what was really interesting was when you think about this Chinese, with the idea of going to the village, you're expecting all of these, you know, small kind of rural houses, but what you encounter are these huge, big buildings, which have a kind of, I think, quite a kind of an American feel. But then when you go inside, the whole bottom floor is kind of open to allow for the kind of the social kind of events and life of the village, big kind of family gatherings, you know, things around Qingming, all of these kind of things that are kind of happening. And what's interesting about the designers is that they've kind of, you know, they've moved in with the villages and they're living in this kind of relationship with them. And so in the words of one of the things they're doing is involved in sort of renovation of some of these village. So this is Dongwu Theatre Building. This is theatre building that dates back from the kind of the Cultural Revolution. And when the Rong Design Company kind of moved there, it was in a state of disrepair. But rather than, say, knocking down and building a new building, they wanted to kind of preserve the specific woodwork of the ceiling. And so a lot of the things that they're kind of doing is about that kind of renovation of the village. But at the same time, is that necessarily always what the villagers want? Some of the villagers want these new, brand new houses, experience, you know, show their status, show their wealth. And what's quite interesting is kind of, in the words of Wang Xingze, he talks about now how most of his work is not necessarily about design, but about the affairs of the village and what's moving. And I think you can see, like, when we talk about authenticity and where value lies, I think that's an interesting thing to think about when we have our discussion kind of later. And also, I think when we're also talking about value and economic value, it's interesting to think about how the Rong Design Studio like makes money, because actually that chair that I showed you at the very start, that Piao chair, they've allowed their export license to to run out, and so now I can't buy that chair. I can't get that imported to me over here in London as much as I want, because really the actual money that and the economic side is supported by the workshop and the factory, which is like the sister site to the library, which is, it's also in the village, but about a mile's walk away. And that's where they make kind of products like these tiles that you can be seen on the screen. And so basically big factories, big tile companies will come to them and say, we want to have a tile to win at the design tile awards. And they will work with them to make those tiles, create some sort of design. And that's what economically funds things like the design library. So when we think about the idea of productive protection, I think it's interesting here because it complicates it. It's not actually the chairs and the things that are making the money for Rong and making those kind of traditions come on. It's something else. It's slightly one stage removed. The chairs are part of the narrative and the things that draw you in. And I think I'm now going to hand over to Lee for our second case study about soft mountains.
All right, 1 second. Let me unmute you, Lisheng. Okay.
I'll stop share, sorry.
Are you, Lisheng, can you? Okay, good.
Sure. Thanks, David. All right, you're seeing the PowerPoint. Great. Yes, we saw just now a case where the kind of contemporary design ideas has been brought into a locality in China. And the second case would seem quite the opposite. We see a brand which is bringing the authentic Chinese ethnic crafts sort of from its locality very much to the world. So Soft Mountains is a Norsu heritage-inspired contemporary jewelry brand founded by Ziwei Longhong in London, and now is based in Shanghai. The brand, the founder Ziwei Longhong is a Norsu native ethnic group inhabited in the southwest of China, and who has which has rich heritage in their silverware. And Ziwei had a career in fashion media before he went to London to do a degree in design and entrepreneurship at the London School of Fashion. And he came from a Norsu background where he drew the aspiration for the Soft Mountains, make a name based on the understanding of how the life and culture of her people, the Norsu people, is very closely related to their highland home. I came across Ziwei and the brand in London after they launched their second collection, and was returning to London, where he finished his degree in fashion, and conducting a research trip in Qingshan, where her hometown is, and where she and the team go regularly for looking for archetypes to use for their design of products. As you see in the photo, these are the soft mountain jewelry items, which is based on prototypical Norsu silverware design, but given a kind of contemporary fashion twist. And the way they work is they go every year for a trip, mostly for a season, to the mountainous area of Liangshan, or the Cool Mountain, in the borderland of Yunnan and Sichuan, and find the local artisans and work with them on the basic design elements for their pieces, and then they brought to small factories to polish them to the standards of jewelry, contemporary jewelry, and then give them a kind of contemporary design twist for them to be sold on international platforms. The Soft Mountains is currently a team of 2 people, and they moved back from London and to Shanghai. We met. We did well after we started the Craft China project. We met and interviewed the Soft Mountain team in London, and in 2019 they had a exhibition in London called The Pieces We Are, and which during the London Fashion Week, and which was successful enough for them to sign a contract with the online e-commerce fashion retailer Net-a-Porter. And so since then, their products has been distributed on the international kind of the frontline fashion retailing website. And as you can see, these are the prices that have been selling. So over 4 or almost 5 years since it was established, the brand had been brought from its locality with the kind of design thinking and rebranding to the platform of international fashion. So this is how they look online. And because of the COVID-19, and after they moved back to Shanghai, we didn't manage to accompany them to a trip to Liangshan, the research trip. And after I came back to China in August, I managed to meet them in Shanghai, hip Baker and Spice cafe, and afterwards, again, we didn't manage to work together anymore. And out of curiosity and in pursuit of any proximity to the original, the place of origin of Soft Mountains, I did a little search on Taobao for the Norsu silverware, and this is what I found. I was rather surprised to see that how very much available these prototypes of jewelries are online. And as I imagine, these were made by local artisans, and which would traditionally be sold mostly to tourists or travelers who did manage physically to visit those areas. And now it's been moved to Taobao, which is a nationwide or international selling platform. And I was also rather surprised to see how little, indeed, the differences between these original types of jewelry and the softer mountain items. And it seems there's a great reminiscence between the two, and which made me, sort of rethink in terms, especially in terms of authenticity, of what really has created the value of softer mountain jewelry. What really is the value of a net-a-day level contemporary jewelry brand is, and which links to, I think, an important sort of antithesis of authenticity that we must consider, is the idea of Shanghai or copycat, which is a kind of unique copycat culture in China, and also Taobao, the online platform, the online retailing platform, has been a hotbed for this culture, and which means to copy almost an original design and selling it at a very cheap price. And this practice is not only is no longer, I should say, a mere replication of the original, but usually accompanied by a created remaking or redesigning of it, to the extent that Shanghai is sometimes celebrated as a critical creative practice. And Shanghai literally means mountain fortress, implying a kind of abounded, sometimes unlawful creativity and parody. But what we see with Softer Mountain here seems to suggest quite the reverse of Shanghai. It is a way of selling almost identical products at a much higher price and on a much higher platform, which led to a little wordplay between me and David, and we thought might it be from a mountain fortress to a metropolitan fortress, and this is truly a way of rebranding and adding the value of the culture and the heritage, and in the form of a narrative mostly, and in imageries that has an appeal for contemporary fashion consumers, that has been added to the authentic or the original craft heritage. And so this is the second case that I offer, sort of in contrast with the first. And now I'll be handing over to David for some abstraction.
Okay, I'm just going to do 2 quick slides, and then I'm going to hand things over to the discussion. So how do we make sense of this? What can we contribute to this debate around authenticity that this seminar series is asking and running and exploring in China? I think for me, the first place to think about, and it's important to think about, we talked about disciplines coming from the cultural heritage MA at the Institute of Archaeology, is this idea about heritage value. This is drawing very much on Wang and Roland's work about making heritage value in China. So the principal contrast that they draw with Western concepts of heritage value, which emphasize general interpretations of authenticity and ownership, derives from the need of Han Chinese people to connect to ancestors and ancestral past in terms of respect and remembrance. So we have some of those ideas about authenticity and ownership being perhaps, you know, Euro-American concepts of heritage value, with a difference from in terms of what's there in the Han Chinese, or the main kind of emphasis is connecting to ancestors and in ancestral pasts in terms of respect and remembrance. What's important, I think, in this paper is the idea of making and unmaking, that heritage value can change over time. So Wang and Rowlands also, we think about the commodification of heritage value, but they talk about being a very contemporary thing, but they, using the terms Wenwu, they emphasize the essential cultural value of heritage materials, while there's a shift used in the Qing to terms such as gudong or guwang, which represents a shift towards the commodity aspects of heritage value. So, and also in the Mao era, they talk about there being a rupture appearing whereby Wenwu or cultural relics were redefined as museum objects, having the scientific value necessary to document each stage in social evolution. So I think that sort of poses this kind of question of what is the value that is being found that it provides authenticity in, you know, the age of the creative economy now in China. And then just thinking about the idea about value, I just want to bring in, David Graeber, and his idea of value as action orientated, which resonated with me in both the examples of the Rong Design Studio and also Soft Mountains. So Graeber begins starting from what I call the Heraclitean tradition, one that sees what seems to be fixed objects as patterns of motion, and what seems to be fixed social structure as patterns of action. Value can best be seen in this light as the way in which actions become meaningful to the actor by being incorporated in some larger social totality, even if in many cases the totality in question exists primarily in the actor's imagination. So why I find this useful is this focus on the actor and action. You know, we might say that within the Rong example, there's a lot of things that are there in terms of the actual act of making, even if the form and the material of the thing itself are changed, but also this idea of the search being part of some larger social totality, which I think, you know, can be imagined. I think, you know, this is interesting for me in terms of thinking about the shift of the designer, where they start talking about shifting from their role being about making products to about having some sort of wider impact within a wider community, which I think you can see in the Rong, within particularly in the village, or within Soft Mountains, about how kind of Norsu identity or history is kind of narrated within the brand itself. So I'm just going to leave that as a kind of, there is a kind of final kind of point to think about, and hopefully provoke discussions in the questions. And then I guess I'm going to hand things back over to Anka and Chris to facilitate the discussion.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to give you a round of applause for everyone here. That was a really fascinating discussion, and a lot of brand new material for me. I think how we're going to do this is a couple ways. One, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat, or either openly to everyone or privately to me. What I'm also going to do is first I'm going to stop the recording.